Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Founders Cut. Today I have Ricky, co-founder of Soundspace. Thanks again for joining me. Really appreciate your time. I know on a busy week for a startup founder, it's always hard to carve out time for things like this, but really appreciate you making time.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I like to start these episodes off by talking to the founders about who they are and how they got to where they are today. So we'll just kind of hear the quick overview of like how you got to being a co-founder of a early stage startup.
Oh boy, I have a really interesting background. I originally went to high school in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I sat down one day at one of those like computer literacy courses that you're supposed to like find out what college you're going to go to and stuff like that. I plugged in both of the majors I wanted to pursue, and it said I had one of one result in the United States for the school I could go to. And so I ended up actually going to that school, which was IUPUI here in Indianapolis. And so I basically just found out about it through that random search. And then I shipped on out and went to IUPUI here. And I studied neuroscience and biotechnology. So there was an interesting duo because neuroscience is a slightly newer field of study as like a specific major. And then biotechnology in general is an applied science. So I was one of the only people who like lived on campus and then also commuted to another school and had to like attend two different things at the time. But before I ever did any of that, actually, I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston for a semester. And I studied guitar there and basically just realized that I could keep practicing, but I really couldn't teach myself science. And so I was super interested to kind of learn that as a formal doctrine. So I went over and went to IUPUI. While I was at school, I started all of these innovation and entrepreneurship clubs on the campus. And as a part of that, they sent me out to Stanford University to learn from the design school there. And so I became a university innovation fellow, learned lean startup methodology, design thinking, a bunch of these really cool ideas. I came back. I spent 6 months in New Zealand writing neuropharmacology papers, and then basically at the end of my college career, I essentially in my last year I started down the sort of design research pathways, and I took like a hard left into more like energy engineering as sort of some research assistants and stuff like that. And actually, I did some space engineering as well. So determining like rockets as they went up onto the moon, carrying parts to build a moon base, wrote a whole paper on that. I scored 97th percentile on the MCAT and then was headed down an MD PhD route. So and basically after all of that super clear trajectory, as a part of that last year, I met this business guy who was essentially a business consultant. He had spent like 30 years in mergers and acquisitions, and he lived out in California. He was working with one of the companies that was coming out of the college I was at. And basically, he just picked me out as his sort of protege and was like, "Hey, you should come do business consulting with me and like take a year in between to see if you really want to go down this MD PhD thing." And I just took a hard left into business from there. So I basically, when I was in that year, it'd been a while since I'd done music, and so I started looking around to record. I called a bunch of different places around town and realized pretty quickly that it was way too expensive for somebody in my position to do music. And I wanted to understand more about like why is that the case? What's going on in the music industry right now? And so the more I looked around, my mind went immediately to design thinking and is like, all right, I need to empathize with as many people as I can right now. So I started talking with musicians all around town, started getting an idea about what was going on in the music industry, and basically we narrowed it down to three areas where people were struggling, and that was with connecting, rehearsing, and recording. And all of those seemed too expensive or didn't have the right things going on. And so what we discovered actually was that there was 74% of studio time was going unbooked at a lot on average in studios. And then you also had about 72% of musicians that couldn't afford the way that it was currently being booked in terms of both on an hourly and then more of like a monthly lockout system. And so while I was talking with a bunch of those musicians, I found a couple of people who were really, really influential who became co-founders. And we launched sort of this small beta space in Indianapolis that was essentially what if we run this whole model on a monthly membership as opposed to doing that hourly or monthly lockout system? And that happened to be right at the beginning of sort of the COVID pandemic. And so we were operating a space that was operating by 24/7 staffless and just by appointment only already. So we were actually pretty well set up for that overall period of time, which kind of garnered us some national attention from different cities and people who were looking at us who were continuing to operate in a way that was safe and made sense. And so we basically just started hearing from people like that, and that's a little bit of kind of the start of how Soundspace started to come to be. And I met my two co-founders, Kai McGinnis and Aaron Hogan. And Kai was fresh out of University of Indianapolis, their PR program, which is internationally renowned. And then Aaron Hogan had worked at ExactTarget as it was bought by Salesforce, and like had come out of this UX UI career and was just an amazing product person. So we just kind of all together built this little functioning studio, and we started having a bunch of studios reach out and be like, hey, how do we do what you're doing? And it became, from that point, sort of a revolution software, right?
I appreciate that deep dive. It's really interesting because I was smiling as you were talking about your journey pre-Soundspace, because there's a lot of similarities to my life, which is went down the STEM field, thought I was going to go into the medical world, and then also made a hard pivot to become more on the entrepreneurial startup side. So super funny, right? I think the takeaway is for people listening that might just be kind of curious about startups in general, but haven't done it themselves, is there's no predetermined path on how you get to becoming a founder of a startup. I think it was at the intersection of like keeping your head up and looking for opportunities, and then seeing one that fit your passion areas. So very cool to hear. Are your two co-founders also musically inclined?
Yeah, so Kai does more like spoken word poetry and stuff like that, but we'll go to like open mics and do that sort of thing. And Aaron's been playing in bands for like 20 plus years at this point. And I actually found him because he was operating sort of a small studio out of his house and was recording a lot of local hip hop artists. So he was just somebody who was right on that scene and has been constantly in it. He's been in several bands that have like, blown up locally over the years as well.
So, you kind of highlighted and hinted at what you're doing. Tell the people more about the nuances of, what is the actual business that you're building?
For sure. So the main thing here is that there's kind of two major problems. One of them is that when you're operating a music studio, most people open up these creative spaces and like, all the way from music studios to podcasting spaces to, if you're going to do creative streaming locations, for example, like for somebody who maybe wants to go on to Twitch or something like that. All of these locations, people are typically opening them because they want to work with those creatives. They're not really opening them because they want to like operate a business, right? So a lot of the people involved there, there's a lot of logistics and administration that go into operating a business like that. And so we actually kind of streamlined the majority of that and then made that into sort of a reproducible package. So we lower that overhead, which allows you to operate that sort of 24/7 staffless kind of operation like that. And that gives you more opportunity you can operate 24/7 staffless, but that gives you the option to just kind of show up and hang out and like be a mentor or provide additional services as a component of that. And that was sort of that first step in that direction. And the further that we go down that way was, let me think about it this way, where we operate a music membership. A bunch of other places came to us and said, how do we do a membership? And we're like, oh, well, we could package this and sell it to other people, but now suddenly everyone else also has a membership. So now it's like, if you're a consumer or a musician in a city, you don't want to have to go to and pick all of the different memberships directly. And so the next question was, well, how do we make it all just one membership? Because that makes way more sense for everybody, right? And so that was essentially the next sort of evolution. And so we got closer and closer to what essentially looks like maybe a class pass model, where you're kind of saying, hey, we pay one price and then we're able to book at all these different places. And so we kind of right now operate with two systems. One of them is You can think about it like a gym membership, where you kind of pick your one home gym you want to go to, and maybe you pay a lower price and you're able to go there on that sort of unlimited system. And then there's that travel pass where essentially you can pay a slightly higher rate, but now you can go to all the gyms on the network, right? And so the further and further we get along, the more data we get, the closer we're actually getting to one universal pricing for that travel pass, saying like, hey, it costs this amount of money and you can book unlimited anywhere on the network, right? Which is really, really exciting. And that gets closer and closer to that sort of ClassPass-like unlimited model that they had early on in their development as well. So it's been a wild ride for that, but it's been really cool to see people be able to access those creative spaces for an affordable monthly rate that's just like set, so that they can keep coming back and sort of use it to the way that they need to in order to enhance their careers.
So from like the brick and mortar perspective, the groups that you're reaching out to build out these partnerships, how much more productivity or revenue generation have you created for some of them? Obviously, you have some early results, most likely. What's the KPIs look like so far in terms of those partnerships?
For sure. So one of the things we really like to track is time to 80% capacity. And we like to help them place their membership price. And essentially, we have like a whole algorithmic backend that helps you to determine how much your time is worth across all these different locations, right? And so what we do is we help them determine for their area in the country, like general real estate pricing, things like that. We factor all of those things together, and we help them set their price so that they have to sell over 16 hours in any given day at whatever price point they're at, in order to compete with the number of members that they could have. And so we take the pressure off of them from needing to sell every hour, and we say, hey, like ongoing, you just have regular monthly membership revenue, and you can go ahead and just rely on that as a more consistent income stream, right? So some of those KPIs, as we look at different partnerships, as we open up a new space, we like to help them get to that 80% capacity as quickly as possible. And essentially right now we're down to maybe a month and a half in order to help do that. And again, it varies wildly based on location, but the goal is to get you past that sort of 16 hours a day booking for that space. So,
and right now, when you first talked about the current industry standard, it's about 30% booking at the moment. Is that correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. On an average number of spaces. So like, in reference to that as well, you might have a music studio that has two like spaces. You have like a studio A and then maybe a studio B. Most people don't think that they can monetize their studio B as well, right? And so we help them just say, hey, we see you have this underutilized room over here. What if it was just constantly bringing you new clients, right? So we're not trying to like undercut the actual studios themselves. It's just helping them to better monetize underutilized resources and then connect on one big network of spaces. So it's much easier to just access those spaces, much easier to get into the local music industry and kind of keep empowering that creative middle class to keep growing.
So, I don't want to put you on the spot in terms of pricing for the studios and whatnot, but for the customer side, the person that wants to, hop around from creative space to creative space, how much it will cost an average member in like the indie area? Because I'm guessing that's one of your first markets that you're in, right?
Yeah, so we opened right now our membership prices at like the HQ location, which was our original beta space that we're just like, hey, this is headquarters where we test new product. Right now you have Connect, Rehearse, and Record are our three major ones. Connect, I think, is only like $30 a month just to kind of be on the network and like come to meetings and come to events and just be a part of that. And it's just a basic co-working kind of thing. And then Rehearse is the first one where you get access to booking a rehearsal space. And I think that one is $150 a month. And then our Record is $200 a month. And that would be sort of like a Studio B like smaller booth with a setup that is It's self-serve, and you come in, we help onboard you to understanding the equipment that's available to you, and then you can just go ahead and book on that sort of unlimited model. So there's certain people who like to hunker down and just go to one place over and over again, so you have that regular sort of workstation. And then there's another group of people who like to go to different spaces. And those memberships are just a little bit more expensive, but it'd be an add-on to say, hey, like this is the difference between, you have a Planet Fitness membership and then a Planet Fitness travel pass as well, right? So it's a similar kind of thing.
Got it. Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I appreciate the kind of the rundown of what you're doing. How many markets are you in right now?
We're in 3 cities. It's Indianapolis, Nashville, Tennessee, and Dallas, Texas areas. We're just about to come into Huntsville, Alabama, and Cincinnati, Ohio. And we'll probably stick with those just for at least probably the remainder of this year, and then we'll be looking at expanding rapidly into other markets afterwards.
Cool. And if people want to learn more about membership or partnering with you as a facility, best way for them to connect would be your website, I'm assuming.
Yep. We are Soundspace without any vowels. So it's sndspc.com, but feel free to just Google Soundspace. Will most likely come up as well.
Cool. And I'll be sure to include it in the description. Part of this also is not just about us focusing on the startup itself, but also the journey, right? So tell me a little bit more about your favorite thing about being a founder and your least favorite thing about being a founder.
Oh man. My favorite thing about being a founder is when everything is like humming and you have great meetings in a week and you're just like, man, we are like on track to hit stuff and we're ready to go. It feels great to be sort of like on what is the equivalent of an old pirate ship or something like that, right? We feel like with a team of people that all just kind of like, you're just out on open waters. Nobody has charted this before. You're just doing a thing. And then the least favorite part is probably the amount of anxiety that comes along with being a pirate on open waters on a regular basis. So you kind of have to like make the balance work.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure that's a sentiment that a lot of founders can really, really resonate with. It's funny you say pirate ship because I know when I was a generator, that was kind of our mantras, like who wants to get on the pirate ship and move forward, right? So very, very
Yeah.
cool. So also, I want to give you some space to let people know the types of folks you're trying to get connected with right now.
For sure. Yeah. So right now we're in an open funding round. We're in an interesting space for the Midwest as well. So definitely just looking around for people who would want to be a strategic investor to help us finish that out. And then otherwise, I'm always looking for connections with music industry folks. We're regularly talking with like Sony, Big Machine, and a bunch of people in that sort of like level of industry. But even just individual space owners who maybe have an underutilized space. We're always looking for more places and more cities. Huntsville actually reached out to us as a city. So their main chamber of commerce and people associated with the city helped us just kind of come into that city, find a bunch of people who had that interest. So even just connections to cities themselves that are interested in us to say, hey, we have a really great operating model. A lot of our investors right now are real estate focused people who see us as a great way to operate a space. And so, if you're interested in creative markets and you want to find a good profitable model that helps more people access those spaces for cheaper, and still functions in a way that encourages that local musical middle class, just anybody who has that sort of mindset, who is thinking in those areas, we're super glad to meet with them.
Yeah, when you think about like the pillars of a good community, South by Southwest is a great example, right? There's a
Yeah.
thriving corporate world, there's a thriving startup world, there's a thriving tech and maybe health kind of atmosphere to it, but then also art and culture is another pillar of it, right? And so certainly I think like, yeah, especially on the real estate side, right? If you're a real estate person that has a lot of space and you're trying to figure out what to do with it, maybe something like Soundspace makes a lot of sense for whatever communities you're trying to get to become more thriving and hustling and bustling, right? So
Yep.
anyone you want to kind of shout out before we wrap this up?
Oh man, we just got through Generator Cincinnati and they have been amazing. And so we've just been trying our best to, shout them out when we can. It's been an awesome program and we are super glad to have them in our corner as we're going forward. So I appreciate them definitely for sure.
Cool. Yeah, very huge shout out to Generator. It's where I got my early access to the startup world. So huge shout out to the team at G8. Well, I think what I want to do is wrap up by reinforcing how they can reach out to you. So Soundspace without the vowels, SNDSPC.com. And if you heard anything here that resonated with you as a listener, and you want to jump on the pirate ship and sail the open seas, reach out to Ricky and his crew, whether it's from a membership perspective, whether it's from a brick and mortar spot that wants to bring more people foot traffic wise, or maybe it's from investment or opportunities to join the team, whatever it is, feel free to reach out. Ricky, really appreciate your time, really appreciate your candor, and thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This has been excellent. I appreciate the questions and the time you've given me today.
Absolutely, anytime.